Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Tubman Talk this afternoon. I'm Dr. Bianca Beauchemin. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. And I'm also a member of the executive committee here at the Tubman Institute and the co-coordinator of the Tubman Talks. Before we begin, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge your presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tacurano has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and this territory is governed by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. In making this land acknowledgement, I honor and acknowledge the land and its people who have been here for over thousands of years. So as I introduce this Tubman Talk, I want to highlight that our Tubman Talks are really a space and a platform to share research and publications with audience who are doing work related or interested in African and African diaspora research. The Tubman community is interdisciplinary, and we welcome a wide range of topic and backgrounds. And it's really an opportunity for individual scholars to critically strengthen their own research by presenting it to others in the spirit of engaging in debate. So we all look forward to the talk and also the Q&A that will add a discussion component to the talk as well. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Molade Osibodu. Dr. Molade Osibodu is an assistant professor of mathematics and education here at York University. Her research critically examines the experience of Black youth in mathematics education, and specifically interested in examining the ways to decolonize mathematics education for liberatory futures, engaging with social justice issues, and exploring African Indigenous mathematic practices. Dr. Osibodu's title for this talk today is Unsettling Colonial Logics in Secondary Mathematics Education. The abstract goes, recently the casting of Black actors in fantasy-based contexts such as The Lord of the Rings, The Ring of Power, House of Dragon, and The Little Mermaid has caused significant controversy. The issue raised the question of where Black people are allowed to exist, as some find it challenging to conceive of Black people simply existing in the realm of fantasy and fiction. In the realm of mathematics education, it appears equally challenging to believe in the success of Black learners in secondary mathematics education. Katherine McKittrick's demonic grounds delve into how physical and material spaces relieve the non-neutral nature of spatiality, particularly for Black people. McKittrick queries, what is it about space, place, and Blackness, the uneven sites of physical and experiential difference that derange the landscape and its inhabitants, end quote. This talk examines how coloniality has contributed to this derangement by closely examining the experiences of Black secondary learners in mathematics education. She challenges the notion of exceptionality by arguing that Black learners' success in mathematics should be normalized. Furthermore, these experiences underscore the imperative to reimagine spaces and to contemplate the condition under which Black mathematics learners not only exist, but thrive in mathematics education. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Osibodu to begin her wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bianca, and thank you, Rebecca. Let me share my screen real quick and then we will get going. Okay, I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, are you all able to see that? Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much once again for having me here. I always say sometimes abstracts just sound way fancier than what you do, but I am really excited and look forward to sharing this talk with you all. So as Bianca stated, I'm sharing work from a paper that's just very close to completion, and hopefully our conversation at the end will further my thinking here as I wrap it up. Apologies for me moving screens, just looking at my notes here. Before moving further, I do want to thank the Harriet Tubman Institute for the seed grants that I was given to help contribute towards this work, but I also want to thank the SHIRC Explorer grants and my faculty's minor research grants, which all contributed in different ways in this study. Okay. Let's go to the next page. Let's go. Okay. All right. So a quick outline for what I will be discussing today. I think it's always paramount to share a little bit about myself in the ways that it does connect with the work, and you will see quite a bit of overlap actually in the snippets that I would share, some of the snippets that I would share from the youth that I worked with. I will then talk about the theoretical orientation before proceeding to the research itself, where we'll spend the bulk of the time. And in part 4, which will be quite short because this is still the part that I'm still working through, but thinking about what it means to normalize Blackness in mathematics spaces. It's also helpful for me to share some necessary framing in this work, which is that I fundamentally believe that mathematics is not a neutral discipline, in that there is quite a number of politics that actually happens in mathematics education. It's not a space where I think I hear people say, oh, you just come and it's just numbers. And it's like, it's not, it goes beyond that. And even numbers themselves can be yielded and wielded in multiple different ways, including causing harm. I believe that Black people are heterogeneous. So of course we would have different experiences. I'm sharing some experiences from the Black youth that I spoke with, but it is not to say that it speaks for everyone. I do believe that all learners are deserving of quality mathematics learning, but I do choose to focus on the experiences of Black learners specifically. I also tend to focus on experiences and not on assessment. So you wouldn't find me using test scores and exams as such to prove anything, because more than anything else, I care about Black learners feeling affirmed in their spaces. I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions, but I will share some of the answers that I do have from this project. Right. Come on. All right. So reflecting on my journey as a Black woman in math, I'm going to read a little bit here. And during the course of our talk, there will be some instances where I'm reading part of my paper. So I am Nigerian. I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, where I lived until the completion of my secondary school education. During secondary school, I realized how much I enjoyed mathematics. And I remember tutoring my friends sometime in SS1 or grade 10 in this context. In grade 12 or SS3, I enrolled in a course called Further Mathematics. There were about 3 or 4 girls in the class of maybe 10 or so. And over the period of the first term, all the other girls dropped the class. At that age, of course, I didn't want to be the only girl left in the class, and I also wanted to follow suit, but my teacher encouraged me to stay in the class, and so I did. I am Black. I relocated to Memphis, Tennessee in the United States for my university education, where I majored in electrical engineering and mathematical sciences. I began noticing that there were few Black students in my calculus and engineering courses, and even fewer Black women. At this time, I didn't yet have a full understanding of why this skewed demographic was occurring, given the large population of Black people in the South where I was located. I graduated and moved on to Little Rock, Arkansas, where I worked briefly as an engineer before subsequently pursuing my master's degree in applied mathematics. My cohort consisted of 5 white men and 1 Black woman. I was that 1 Black woman. It felt uncomfortable, but I was confident in my mathematical abilities, and so I wasn't fazed. However, I recall a particular moment that I can still picture these many years later. We had gotten a difficult assignment in our advanced differential equations course that we were all enrolled in. I remember the guys all huddling together to figure it out, and I was left on my own. Up until this point, no one really asked me for help in any class work, but I solved the difficult question. When I told the guys, they looked stunned. While, of course, I cannot say for certain why I was not initially included in the group, it felt to me as though I had to prove that I belonged in the space before I could be invited to join the inner ring, if you will. I am African. I moved to Johannesburg, South Africa to teach mathematics. Teaching at the African Leadership Academy where I worked helped me refine the questions that I really wanted to answer. I wondered how mathematics could play a role in advancing the school's mission, which was to develop the future generation of African leaders through challenging social issues. I share these excerpts from my life's journey thus far because it contextualizes this paper and invites you to see why supporting Black youth matter. As I myself straddle being Black in both sub-Saharan African spaces and also being Black in racialized spaces, my research in one sentence seeks to make mathematics learning humanizing for Black youth. Specifically, I explore sociopolitical and sociocultural factors impacting Black and sub-Saharan African youth's mathematics experiences and the ways mathematics education can be harnessed to redress social issues related to these factors. So for this particular paper, I was guided by theories of anti-Blackness, demonic grounds, and coloniality. And I'll talk about these pretty briefly. My argument is that though the streaming began in grade 9 mathematics in Ontario in 2021, following uprising in 2020 during the movement for Black Lives, but also through work that has been done by different actors who really cared about the experiences of Black youth. That said, I still was curious as to what was happening with Black youth in the Ontario context, because my hunch was that this streaming alone doesn't solve it all. Anti-Blackness, as Dumas and Ross articulates, is not simply racism against Black people. Rather, anti-Blackness refers to a broader antagonistic relationship between Blackness and the possibility of humanity. There is an antagonistic relationship between Blackness and the system of mathematics education that causes Black youth to feel as though their brilliance cannot be shown or accepted in mathematics education. Or as McKittrick said, that their brilliance is naturally unbelievable. Such disbelief, as many as I've argued, is caused by mathematics functioning largely as a white, male, hetero, cis, gendered, wealthy institutional space that is wholly anti-Black. I also draw on, I didn't realize I didn't have that, my apologies. I also draw on Katherine McKittrick's demonic grounds, and in particular, thinking about how in her work, she pushes for the non-neutrality of spaces and of spatiality, particularly for Black people. She queried that what is it about space, place, and Blackness, the uneven sites of physical and experiential difference, that deranges the landscape and its inhabitants? I assert that this derangement is engendered by coloniality that continues to perpetuate epistemic violence in constructing mathematics as a neutral, abstract discipline, instead of a mathematics that lives, that breathes, that moves. This coloniality, or thus coloniality, also generates anti-Blackness, which Dumas and Ross articulate is not simply racism against Black people, as I mentioned earlier. Through coloniality, I think about coloniality in the context of power, knowledge, and being, as authors, as different scholars have articulated. With coloniality of power, it really helps me think about the global structure that has organized mathematics as is in this present day. And as Joseph shared, mathematics has always been treated as a subject relegated to the elites, particularly in racialized context. Joseph further stated, and I quote, that there is a tendency to perceive mathematical pursuits as confined to an elite a select few who possess the requisite qualities or gifts denied to the vast majority of humanity. And with coloniality of knowledge, this further challenges the types of contents that exist in mathematics, the types of contents that dehumanizes and diminishes indigenous ways of knowing in mathematics, for instance. And lastly, with coloniality of being, this is the notion that somehow that we are separated into zones of beings and zones of non-beings, as Fanon wrote about the Dam. I think about this as similar to the quote that I read earlier, this notion that there are zones of those who are math people and those who are simply not math people. And so with all that in mind and being guided by these theories, I will now share some of the findings from my research. And I'll share a bit more. I've already talked about the motivation for the study and really trying to understand the context here in Canada and Ontario specifically, noticing that there was such a dearth of research that has really delved into documenting the experiences of Black youth in mathematics specifically. Now, there are scholars who have done such great work in examining the experiences of Black youth broadly in educational spaces. And through those, I was able to glean a little bit from what youth had shared about their mathematics experiences in particular. And I'm thinking of James and Turner's report that came out, I think, in 2017, a really important study that helped me in my work as well. And so the two research questions that I drawn for this work are, what are the barriers that impact Black youth's mathematics learning experiences? And what practices inside and outside of school would support Black youth's belongingness in the mathematics learning? I think I do my best in trying to answer these questions from what I shared today, recognizing I couldn't share it all given time constraints. Come on. All right. This was a qualitative research study where I conducted semi-structured individual interviews with 9 Black identifying youth from winter 2021 up until spring 2022. I also did an activity during the interviews called the identity card sort, which I will share more about, and you'll get an example of it shortly. But in brief, I asked youth to self-select 3 of their salient identities that matter to them. And aside from those 3, I had pre-selected 2 particular identity markers that I asked them to fill, and those 2 were their racial identity and their ethnic identity. I think I struggled with the labeling there, but what I meant was if they identify as Nigerian Canadian, for instance, or Jamaican Canadian, then I wanted them to have those 2 presets, and they could include whatever else they wanted to include for the other 3, and you'll get to see an example. In my analysis, I used the thematic analysis, really being guided by the frameworks that I have just shared. There were 3 major findings from this study. The first being Black youth feeling that they had to prove their belongingness in mathematics, that there's a lack of Black secondary mathematics teachers, and the notion of smartness being racialized in mathematics classes. And so I'll start with the first one. So with proving belongingness in mathematics, similar to my own experience of feeling like I had to prove that I belonged in my applied mathematics master's program, most of the Black youth in this study felt similarly. These youth felt as though they needed to validate their belongingness using their intellects, e.g. through high grades and tests before being accepted into their math class. For instance, when I asked Alyssa and all the names that I mentioned are pseudonyms, of course, Alyssa, who was in grade 10 at the time of the study, when I asked her to discuss her reasoning for arranging her card sort in the way that she did for math class, I noticed that she did not mention. Actually, let me back up. I missed something. In doing the card sort, so we had the 5 identity markers, and I first had them to arrange it at school, at home, in their favorite class, whatever that was, and then in math class, if math wasn't selected as their favorite class. And that was intentional because I didn't want math to be the the first step in the card sort. And after we did this, then when I went on to ask some of the questions that I had set out. And so for Alyssa, I thought it was really interesting that when she was discussing her reasoning for arranging the cards the way she did in the first three categories, that is at school, at home, and in her favorite class, she didn't mention anything around intellect in her explanation. She had different reasons for why she picked those. But when I asked her to explain her reasoning for why she picked these cards in math class, she immediately began discussing notions of smartness. And it's really important to emphasize that my prompt remained the same across the board. All I said was, why did you pick it the way that you picked it? And that was the only question that I asked. In her response, go to the next slide here. In her response, she immediately began focusing on the context of her abilities. She began first by discussing her mathematics abilities in the context of her gender, where she noted that when she was younger, peers assumed that she wasn't smart because she was a girl. And then she went on to talk about her racial and ethnic identity. And so in this quote, she said, I think personally, as an African Canadian person, and because I look this way, I'm not necessarily one of those students that are first perceived as smart. And maybe it's because I'm a woman as well, but I actually even received this joke this year that like, oh, wow, like you're actually smart. And I was like, okay, yeah, I study, I work hard. They're like, oh, you did well, you got 100%. And I'm like, yeah, I like math. I'm just as competent as anyone else, I would say. As Alyssa spoke, her facial expression was one of incredulity. She seemed visibly exhausted that her being African Canadian and identifying as a woman did not leave space for her to belong in math class. Alyssa was not alone in feeling this way. Shale, another participant in the study who was in grade 12 at the time, discussed the surprise his peers exuded when he also did well on mathematics test. He shared that when I was getting really good grades, good marks on tests and stuff, people seemed kind of surprised. Shane was also the only Black student in his math class out of about 25 to 26 peers in his class. While both Shane and Alyssa attended schools with relatively low numbers of Black students, given where their school was located in the GTA, Olivia attended a very diverse school, as she discussed. Yet, in her academic math class, she still remarked that she was often one of very few Black students in the class. In fact, she shared the following. She shared that, and I put Black here in her card sort because sometimes in the class, I might be like one of the few Black people in the class. And I put female because that's even a smaller number if I'm Black and female. And as I read this now, I think about how similar this is and was to my own experience, which was in 2002, so many years later, almost 2 decades later, and also in a different country, and yet still having similar experiences. Olivia further noted that she feels different when she enters her math class, not because anyone remarks on her presence in there, but because she just felt different. She specifically, nope, that's the right one. Okay. She specifically shared that, sometimes she feels like she's the only one who sometimes sees that she's different by looking at her gender and her race, but she's not sure if other people see her that way, but she feels it. She feels the energy. Like Olivia, Natasha also attended a very diverse school. She picked that race was not an issue in her school because she had many Black peers, but when I asked her about math class, she noticed that this was not a norm. In fact, Natasha shared that, it kind of adds a pressure that I should remain in academic math to prove to somebody, somewhere, someone wrong, even though, again, there's no spotlight on me, but there kind of is. It's like, being maybe not the only, but like being one of the few, it's kind of rare. And we notice an overlap also with what Olivia just shared. Natasha's words remained on my mind long after this interview took place because she particularly mentioned love in mathematics. She loved it so much that she was the youth who even selected math as one of her salient identities in the card sort, which I thought was very unique. But despite her very strong identity with her mathematics abilities, she still felt like she needed to prove to somebody, someone, somewhere. Some of the youth noted practices that could counter the burden of proving belongingness in their math class. For instance, Alyssa believes that there needs to be a focus on the emotional and mental well-being for Black youth, particularly those taking courses like this, where there are so few Black youth in them. And she also noted that this includes engaging teachers and other learners in the learning to make it clear that Black youth are just as deserving to be in these mathematics classes as others. Moreover, Olivia and Jason, another participant, would also like to see the creation of clubs that focus on Black learners and mathematics. Jason shared that he wonders if Black learners will feel more comfortable going to peer tutoring, for instance, if it was offered through the Black student group on campus. Right. Many have written about the importance of representation across different spaces, such as through visual arts, in books, different professions. A notable finding in this research indicated the dearth of Black math secondary teachers at the different schools across the GTA. Indeed, the youth I engaged with remarked about the lack of Black teachers they have, regardless of the subject area, but the few who did note that they were in very diverse schools still stressed the lack of Black math teachers that they had in their secondary grades. Alyssa, Simi, Sheon, and Tokwe, for instance, had never had Black teachers throughout their schooling thus far. Busi remembers having a Black teacher in grade 2, computer lab. Olivia thinks that she remembers having a Black teacher in grade 10, food and nutrition, and Jason had a Black teacher who taught his grade 11 Black history. While Natasha indicated that she had been taught by multiple Black teachers, as she was in a very diverse school in the GTA, she does believe that the only time she had a Black teacher in mathematics was in the 7th grade. And I capture it in the conversation thread that I share here. And so I'd asked her, have you ever had any Black teachers? And she said, yeah, all the time. And then I asked her about if she had had a Black teacher in math class. And she was like, ooh, let me see, maybe once in grade 7. And so she hadn't noticed this lack before. And similarly, I asked Alyssa the same question, and I also shared the conversation thread here. I asked her, similarly, have you had any Black teachers? And she says, yeah, maybe in homeroom, but that wasn't even my teacher. She was a coach. Wow, I'm even thinking back to kindergarten. And then I asked her, why do you look so stunned right now? And she goes, because wow, I've never had wow representing, like in the moments of the interviews when she was noticing that she hadn't had this experience of having a Black teacher before. At the start of the school year, I'll just share this little snippet. I always engage the teacher candidates that I teach in my intermediate senior mathematics course. I engage them in an exercise where I lead them to Google mathematician and analyze the images that they see. And I've been doing this for many years now. And I've noticed how it's changed subtly, but still not much when you check it yourself. In a similar vein, and given the rise of AI softwares like ChatGPT, I was curious what ChatGPT would say. So I first asked ChatGPT to name 10 mathematicians. I then asked it to name 10 Black mathematicians, and I noticed that those lists did not overlap. So similarly, the default for ChatGPT is that the 10 mathematicians are not Black in any way, even though it also knows that there are Black mathematicians that exist. I've also engaged the teacher candidates that I work with in analyzing representation of math learners and teachers across media, such as through TV shows and movies. Across all the examples that they share, like Good Will Hunting, Gifted, A Beautiful Mind, Mean Girls, they have in their own analysis noticed an overrepresentation of the so-called math prodigy being depicted as white, East Asian, or South Asian men. However, there is also a decent representation of white girls represented, but across the corpus of shows and movies that my teacher candidates have analyzed, none have included a Black character as the mathematics prodigy in that way. And this lack of representation, I think, is seeped in the cultural ether that even the youth are noticing in their work. And so continuing on to the final finding, where I asked the youth to talk about who they feel like is smart in math class, or how they think and see smartness in mathematics classes, it's not surprising the ways that they themselves racialized smartness in mathematics. So I'll share a few quotes from some of the youth here. And so the first being, Jason shared that I feel like some Asian kids are good at math because I don't know. I feel like they're just like good at math because they learn a year up or something, even though he's talking about people who are studying, Asian students who are studying in Canada, just like him. Natasha shared that some of them are like me, but most of them, I haven't really noticed much Black students who are interested in math. It's more so Asians. And Takwe said, similarly, I feel like just Asian people in general, not just like Asian people as a whole, but specifically South Asian or East Asian. Even though most of the youth I spoke with discussed their love and aptitude for mathematics, it appeared that they still saw themselves as anomalies and not the norm. Similar to the lack of representation in Black culture, these youth did not include Black people as exemplifying smartness in mathematics, even though they themselves really, most of them did talk about really enjoying mathematics. I wanted to add one more quote from Alyssa because I think what she shared was really poignant. And so I'll read the quote first. She shared, when I asked her where she feels like this comes from, this notion that somehow Black people are not seen as smart in math, given her responses. And she goes, yes, and only because of the energy you get from others. So when you're told, oh, it's not conceived to you that you can't, you're not smart enough, you couldn't be, then you're going to feel like you shouldn't be doing that. Where students who may have that encouragement, or other people just automatically thinking that you're smart, like, oh, you can do this, well, all that encouragement, all that energy and opportunity will make you feel like you can actually do it. And she was grade 10 at the time of sharing this. And I felt like it was really insightful because she expertly analyzed the way Asian students are positioned as being very smart in mathematics, even without needing to prove it in the way that the Black youth that I spoke with all felt like they had to prove their smartness. In Alyssa's comments, she indicated that she did not inherently believe some to be better than others in mathematics, but that if you are repeatedly affirmed, either from representation you see or through the encouragement of others, that you can succeed in mathematics, you begin to believe it. And of course, the reverse of that, by her comments would then be true as well. And so as I'm concluding here, I think about how coloniality and anti-Blackness, and borrowing from McKittrick again, have deranged this landscape of mathematics education that has somehow made it seem and continues to make it seem as though Black people do not belong in mathematics spaces. A major implication of this work that I see at this point is that Blackness is still seen as an anomaly in mathematics spaces, and this needs to be interrupted. I've been thinking and playing with representation in media in particular, as I've been noticing more and more this lack of representation there, and what this might have to offer if we were to change this and begin seeing more representations in visual media and also in the books that we read. For instance, one of my favorite characters, why am I struggling to turn? Okay, we're there. Is Dwayne Wayne's character in A Different World. So throwback to a show from the late 80s, early 90s. It is surprising to me how few people reference Dwayne Wayne and how we've somehow not had another character like Dwayne Wayne since then, who loved mathematics, was super passionate about mathematics, was taught by a Black mathematics professor at the university he attended, and who ended up becoming a mathematics teaching assistant, at least through the the length of the show. I like this poem that Dwayne Wade wrote about mathematics in season 3, episode 13. If you want to go back and look at that from a different world, and if you would indulge me in just reading this here, it's pretty short. She's always been a challenge to me from our very first hello. I pursue this woman of mystery, determined she would not be a puzzle to me. I soon found comfort in her complexity. I look into her dark and smoky eyes, admiring her angles and curves, her elliptical lips. She divides men from boys, adding and subtracting hearts, until alone I stand, her heart in my hand. She is mine, Sol Forex, my first love. And I hope you were able to see some of the mathematical terminologies in this poem. But what I really love about this character of Dwayne Wayne is that he wasn't portrayed as awkward. He wasn't portrayed as broken. He was a full person in this show. And his loving math and being good at math in the way that he was just normal. It was not an exception. It was never a theme on the show. It was just normal. I also think about the book Binti, and I see some of my friends are in here when we read Binti together. I think about this example as well as this case where this character, this young Black girl, Binti, was shown to be this really skilled mathematician in this book. Her love for mathematics was a through line through the book, and it really showed the ways mathematics connected Binti to her home, to her history. In this quote that I put here, it was noting how even her hair was braided, and it was braided in tessellating triangles, and that this braiding was actually a code that connected to her history and her bloodline and her culture. But these two examples are very rare of instances where Black learners, where Black characters are being shown to really possess this enjoyment and love for mathematics. And we really need more of that. And so I'm just going to end with this quote by Katherine McKittrick from her book, Dear Science, where she noted that stories do not offer lucid tales or answers. Rather, they signal ways of living in a world that denies Black humanity, or more aptly, the stories signal ways of Black livingness. And so my push is that we need to tell more stories. We need to share more stories that shows Black livingness in the context of mathematics as well. We need more Dwayne Waynes, we need more Bintis, and characters that don't seem or appear broken or awkward, but that are full in their humanity. And perhaps through these representations, it would begin to continue to seep through the notion that Black people and Black learners do in fact belong in mathematics spaces, despite what the vehicles of coloniality will have us believe. And that would be the end. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Doctor. This was such a great talk, and what really struck me is that I think from the outset you really highlighted how math is not a neutral field, but through your research, you're showing us that so beautifully. Just the way in which you're using qualitative theoretical frameworks to talk about mathematics, I think, is something that I guess some of us don't expect from a field like that. And I feel like you're shaking up that field quite a bit, which is quite amazing. I had a question I wanted to ask in relation to that. And then after that, I know maybe some of my co-coordinators and other folks in the chat are going to want to in the way that you're doing your research in math, and I see it obviously being very relevant to the STEM conversation in terms of getting more kids of color, Black kids into STEM, but really highlighting the research that goes why it's needed, do you feel that funding and fellowships and these types of things are sort of the way to go? Does that have to start a little bit earlier from like elementary school? You're looking at secondary school, but are there things that need to start a lot earlier than in university? Are you seeing changes in universities now? So kind of highlighting the prior and the after of secondary school, and where perhaps the attitudes, aspects of belonging that are happening in secondary school, can they be mitigated, or can at different parts of the educational journey?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I want to put some notes here because there's two ways that I'm thinking about it. I think that on one hand, we can have all of the funding on all of the things, but there's still because Black youth are in these spaces already. So it's not that they're not in these spaces, but it's that they are still seen by their peers, by their teachers, as somehow not belonging into those space. So even if we, we have all, STEM programs, and we have a ton of these right now, it's that I think that a lot of the work needs to be done in working with peers and teachers, and really trying to change and disrupt this notion. I think this is the part that I'm still struggling with, because I keep thinking that this happened to me in over 2 decades ago. I started noticing these, and I'm talking to these young people in a different context, and they're still feeling the same way. And so I think that there's over 20 years, and of course, long before, lots of scholars and researchers have been trying and trying and trying. And I don't know what, I think there's something deeper that needs to be done. I think that we've been focusing on trying to bring more people of color into spaces like this. And I think that we are here and we love it. So that's not the issue. I think that it's more, what spaces do we need to create when we are here, to make sure that we're not being pushed out of these spaces. And I think one of the ideas that I've been thinking about is that we spend a lot of time supporting and encouraging Black learners who really enjoy mathematics to go into the industry. A lot of the time, it's very rare that we encourage them to go into teaching. And we need to do that because we don't have a lot of Black teachers, Black secondary math teachers. And I was a teacher, I'm still a teacher, and I think that it's really important that we balance that, because I do think that also the more Black teachers you see in mathematics, that hopefully will also support. But I'm also, I recognize that coloniality is, it's so sipped through, it's sipped in every facet of our society, and particularly when we're thinking through or thinking about racialized spaces like the one where we're in. It's a battle to try to change these notions that exist, that we don't belong in these spaces. And I think that's why, at least the one of the solutions that I am proposing, I need Eva DuVernay to contact me, and then I can, support coming up with scripts and things. But I do feel like in media, there's so little representation of Black learners, math learners in those spaces, and being seen as full, as I mentioned. And I think that's a space that hasn't been tapped yet. And I wonder if we begin changing that, if that would make some difference.
Thank you so much. I see a hand. I had seen Francis' hand, and then I had seen Rachel's hand. So Francis, if you want to ask your question, and I have Rachel.
So good afternoon. I was really excited to join this session, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. First of all, my name is Francis Jeffers. I'm the the curator for the Canadian Multicultural Inventors Museum. I've been doing STEM promotion for must be 40 years plus. But I mean, one of the interesting things was one in terms of the experiences of the young people was that as a 16-year-old coming to Canada, being in math classes where I was the only person of African descent, and the same dealt with the same issues, and it was interesting. I'll just give a short thing of where a teacher attempted to be encouraging to me as a Black student, in that it happened that for one of the tests, I got the highest mark. So what the teacher attempted to do over the next 3 weeks was every time that there was a problem to solve she would call me to go up to the board for me to solve the problem. Interestingly enough, it seemed like an interesting technique. Well, what it did was just, as a 16-year-old, just made me just upset after a while, but you were being singled out as a young Black person. And most times, you're a new immigrant to Canada, you want to kind of blend in and all of that kind of stuff. And you don't want to be to be perceived as a super nerd in the class and all this kind of stuff. So it's really interesting about, how, first of all, how teachers have to deal with Black students and Black students who are doing well, and the issues of smartness. Because we saw later on the negativity where for a lot of Black kids who are doing well in STEM, up to like 10 years ago, kids would not say how well they're doing, because they don't want to be seen as an exceptional Black person, but they just want to be seen as a bright student. So that's one thing. I'm going to try to cover a few things. The other aspect is the field of ethnomathematics, which unquestionably, much more needs to be done in this work. One, in that in mathematics, Black mathematicians are not seen at the center. Kids are not, a Black kid who loves mathematics is never put at the center of the mathematics. And I think unquestionably, kids have to be at the center of the knowledge. And so therefore, in terms of content about the history of Blacks in mathematics from ancient Africa to present day, the fact that mathematics in general really is not very good at the history. The history of mathematics is it's not good for people of color anyway. I mean, if you're a Greek, fine, but for the contributions of even Asians in mathematics is not celebrated. And for Blacks and indigenous peoples and people from the Middle East, etc., their contributions to mathematics, the regular math teacher does not even deal with, period, the history of a diverse mathematics societies that we're. And worse yet, if you look at Islamic contributions to mathematics, a lot of these things are just not dealt in mathematics, right? So therefore, the colonization aspect of mathematics is clear and very vivid, right? So then we come back now to the fact that how do we get young Black mathematicians to enjoy science? How can we use them to create the content? One of the things I've been finding talking to young students is that this notion that teachers will provide the information, will do the background research and empower young people is not really happening. And the question is, how can we then encourage young Black mathematicians or young Black STEM people to be the content creators, because they have what it takes to become the content creator. So they can then be activists in making the change that they desire for themselves, and to plan ahead and to look ahead for young people, right? So that's what I want to like to actually touch on. And the last one I like to touch on, in my experience with mathematics and doing STEM promotion here, there's clearly a difference in the success of girls, especially girls of continental African backgrounds, and also versus kids of Caribbean background. And one of the problems we have in STEM is how do we look at that, and in particular in math, how do we look at what is causing that huge gap in terms of, even when the continental kids are in similar situations as the Caribbean kids, they still actually perform at a level, especially Nigerian kids. And I think just looking at the names here, most of the names here, just on the list of people on this session, are continental African background. So it's really interesting, some of the dynamics of when we're doing this kind of research, how deep are we going, and are we going to touch things that are uncomfortable? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, I just wanted to take some notes here. Yeah. Okay. And I will mention, I only spoke to 9 youth. That certainly doesn't speak for, it was a pilot study as I was trying to figure out what was going on somewhat in this context. And I mean, I think with the first question, I'm taking that as a note. I don't know that I have the answers necessarily, but thinking about young Black math learners in being content created, I think the first thought that came to my mind is that, is it fair to put that burden on them, versus, because that can feel like that given everything else that they have going on in their education. So should the onus be on them? Should the onus be on everyone else in the class? Because one person's history, so learning more about the contributions of one group of people, in this case, the contributions of Black mathematicians from the diaspora broadly in mathematics, should be a task that everyone in the class should be doing, and not just the Black learners in the class, for instance. But I know that there's teachers who are trying to do this on their own and doing the work on their own in making sure that they are moving just beyond discussing Greek contributions, which is tends to be the baseline in math, but also highlighting the contributions of many other groups of people that have come into mathematics. So that's my thought around that. But I think every time I think about it, my question is always around, there's curriculum matters, because that once again matters, but I think that there is, like, beyond curriculum, because we can have the curriculum and then this is still an issue, right? Like, I don't know that it solves it all. I think that it would help, but I'm not sure that it would solve everything. And so I think I'm still thinking about, even when we do this, and we have seen a massive rise over the last decade, at least, probably longer, of different scholars discussing contributions and really trying to bring out resources to help, but yet we're still noticing some of these issues. I can't speak for the gap. I think that in my work, I remember in grad school we read a paper around, like, gap gazing. I don't like to do that work. I think that for me, I don't like to look at why is this group better than this group, but really working with whatever group you want to work with and talking and understanding what's happening, because I think that doing the comparison can be problematic in some sense as well, because I think it would be similar to, and I don't subscribe to the work of that scholars used to do. I think we see far less of that now in comparing the achievement of Black learners with white learners, and it's like white learners are not the baseline, and so we want to disrupt that. But I do think that it is. I think that there's a lot that can go into trying to explore what's happening with the groups as they are, and trying to figure out how to support. But yeah, I think that that's important work to do. And there were I recognized through my snowball sampling that I ended up just having more Nigerian. It wasn't at all intentional. But perhaps because people saw my name when I was seeking participants and encourage their kids. But of the 9, 3 of them were Caribbean, Black in the study. 3 or 4. Yeah. I'm serious. I didn't know any of them personally. I don't know their families or anything. Right. Okay. But thank you so much for those points, Francis, because I think those are important for us to consider. And I think this is why my frustration at seeing that the math ed, scholarly community, if you will, has not been focused on also on trying to see, what are these experiences. My study was pretty broad, but I hope that it is important and that more researchers start taking slices of it in working with different groups of Black communities in their work.
Rachel, your questions next.
Thanks, Bianca. And thank you, Dr. Molade, for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. Just from the discussions thus far, I'm thinking that there are 2 things to focus on here. So one is the problem of ensuring that Blacks stay in these mathematical spaces. And secondly, ensuring that Blacks enter the math space. And so I think what I'm most concerned about is the entry into the mathematical space. We're not seeing much entry even until this day and age. I think seeing content surrounding, perhaps like the young Nigerian girl who won the international case competition, she won several actually. That does help to boost confidence within the Black community and sort of promote the idea of entering the space. And we also talked about seeing Blacks talk about math in the entertainment industry. And we talked about education as well, seeing Black representation amongst teachers. So I'm just wondering, is there anything else that we can do to increase, the proliferation of math amongst the Black community? If this is not enough, then what else do we need to be doing to make that passion a natural integration within the Black community? And if we don't want to force them to become content creators, then what else should we be doing?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Rachel, right? Yes. I almost want to cop out and be like, remember earlier I said I have a lot of questions. So these are big questions that I am, one comment that I will say that, and this is certainly not my original idea, but I think even in the way that you had talked about your question, that there's still this notion that, like, I don't like this pressure that Black youth have to be exceptional or be even in math, like you don't have to love it. I actually my mission is not to promote that everyone has to love math, because I don't think that that's possible. I don't love everything. But that when you're here, and especially, in Ontario, math is required in grade 9 through grade 11, and then grade 12 is where it's optional. And so for grade 9 through 11, everyone is required to be here, and everyone should have access and the opportunity to feel like they belong in those spaces. But I worry about this. I think about how, in general, like us as Black people are not allowed to be mediocre in things. And I think that that's important. That is the dream, that we can be mediocre in things and it's fine, and we're not somehow representing everybody. But anyway, so that was just a side note, because I think that part is important, because from talking to them, and it was Alisa who had mentioned in particular, like she was really specific about talking about this mental toll. And I think about Natasha, who she literally listed math as one of her identities. I love math, and I would not list math as one of mine. But like that's how much she loved math, and still sharing how she has to prove to somebody, like she has to represent, everyone, because I'm here, and I need to make sure that I'm not slipping. And that pressure is a lot to place on Black learners in this space. I think I'm shifting away from the question a little bit, but I think I mean this is a question that I am still thinking through. But I think the reason why I talked about the requirement of math is that they are already entered into the space because it is required for everyone to take math from grade 9 through 11. So you are required to be in that space. And I think that's why for me, I'm thinking about, all right, what's happening when you're in the space? Because you are required to be here. How are we making sure that we're supporting you being in these spaces? Because if we don't do this, then it makes sense why we have fewer, perhaps, Black people in STEM fields and things like that. Even though my own passion is trying to get more Black learners who do enjoy math to consider teaching, because I think we really need to see more faces that look like mine in those spaces as well. So I'm not sure how to answer the question, only to say that a lot of the work, I think, really has to start from early on. I didn't share some data, otherwise the talk could have been too long, but I know that one thing that the youth had talked about when they talked about the classes that they really enjoy, they were talking about classes that allow, and this is a quote from someone, I forgot whose name right off the bat, that she shared that, this class, I think it was her drama class, allowed her to be herself. And she said that, we talk about things, and we talk about race, and we talk about we talk about topics that really matter, but that we're not doing this we don't talk about this in math class. And in fact, we don't talk about anything in math class, which this was shocking for me, that in 2021, 2022, when I collected this data, that we're still not talking in math class, which is the big part of what we talk about in research, that I thought that we had left this version of teaching where it's the teacher is writing, students are quiet, ask a question, yes or no. And that's, the way we talk about math teaching, it's really important that it is, you're having conversations, you're really pushing for conceptual understanding and not just copy and pasting exactly the exact method the teacher taught. And so that's a bigger issue, because if math class at the secondary level is devoid of conversation, and it's still a space where there's such policing even in your behavior in this class versus in the other classes, that they feel like they get to be free and be themselves, then it's hard to even permeate these other conversations, like bringing in issues of justice/injustice into math class, using math as a space where we're not just talking about random apples and oranges, but that we're actually using math to talk about topics that matter. And this was something I asked them, would you, if we were teaching math in this way of including important issues in class, all of them were like, this is great, but we don't talk in math class. So how would that happen exactly? And so that's a different context to think through. So I feel like for me, those are all the other questions that I'm still trying to grapple with in ensuring that conversation is happening, and that Black youth feel like they can also, talk and share their ideas in the class. But yeah, thank you for that question. I'm not sure how much I answered it, but because it is a really big question that I feel like so many are continuing to work through.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sylvia, you're next.
So thank you so much, Molade, for the talk. I have so many questions. I clearly will not ask you all of them. When I meet you over tea or something, I'll bring some of them up. But I really liked and loved that you included Afrofuturism into your presentation and also brought in popular culture, because that livened up the conversation. And, you know, I'm sure you know about the stereotype that when it is math, everyone thinks, oh my God, well, how are we going to sit through this? And, you know, you were talking about math and talking about the various ways in which math works, you know, applied mathematics, which I think for some of us just growing up, and I didn't grow up here, so, you know, there's a difference in that context. And part of that question for me was asked by Francis earlier about how, you know, how these ideas or how these findings travel globally. You know, because if we are talking about Black people in mathematics in Black majority countries, I don't think we'll face similar challenges. The other thing that I was thinking about was also in terms of whether or not math teachers themselves inspire people to stay in mathematics. And, you know, and despite the fact that, and it's a real problem to not have Black educators in mathematics. And of course, my experiences do not translate, but if any of the people who taught me math were teaching math here, I don't know how many people would stay in math classes. Because there is also this stereotype that, you know, you just have to get math. And if you don't get it, you don't get it. Like if you're not one of these people who just learn, who just walk, speak, and eat mathematics, you shouldn't be in the math, like especially in advanced mathematics classes. And so I wonder if some of this also has to do with the self-selection of teachers. And then the other bit is about role modeling. I mean, what do mathematics teachers or people who end up doing mathematics, where do they go, right? I mean, some of this, we take these things for granted, but if a kid is like, yeah, all my math teachers are probably not very exciting people. I'm not saying that that is the situation, but I'm just curious about the overall picture, like what is motivating kids to want to. The last thing, and you don't have to answer all of this, I think that this is such a fantastic study that I think you could start, I mean, not that, look at me giving you suggestions of what to do next. This is what we do. But I'm really very curious about the generational changes that we are going to see within the context of Canada, because there's a bit of a difference with the United States, where we can talk about Black people who've been there for much longer period than in the context of Canada, where you have the majority still of Black people being immigrant, or who've immigrated from, you know, the continent of Africa and or the Caribbean. I'm curious to see whether, you know, in another 4, 5, 6 years, we're going to see similar problems with students not wanting to be in mathematics, or changing because even the face of, you know, second generation Canadians is changing, you know, those kinds of things. So I'm really curious about those kinds of generational impacts, or parents becoming a little bit more involved in the education of their children, or mathematics education and that sort of thing. But thank you. This was a very exciting conversation, and I really like the reference to Binti, of course. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for all of these questions. I will try to answer them as best as I can. You know, when I sought out to do this study, and my hope was to try to have different types of, you know, Black people, essentially from different backgrounds. And it's, you know, it was a small number. It was a pilot study. It wasn't ever going to be that big. But I did, and my intention was not to have Black learners who loved math. I think that actually ended up working out well, because my thought was most of the 9, at least 7 of them shared that they love math. And so my thing is that if I'm talking to you and you actually love it, like this isn't an issue of we need you to, like, no, we love it, we're happy to be here, but that you love it and you are still facing these issues. Now imagine those who don't even enjoy math to begin with. So I feel like, even though that's not what I set out to do, my argument is that already those who enjoy this subject, as we all enjoy things differently, are still facing this barrier. And I think that there comes a point where it just becomes a lot. It's like, why am I pushing up against this? Even though I'm happy to, I enjoyed the subject itself, but I don't know what my experience would have been if I had grown up in a space like this where my race was, was seen as like I'm not supposed to be here. But I think it goes back to your first question of, how does this translate? So you remember when I shared about my story, when I talked about the Nigerian aspect, it was the gender part, because that part is an issue still. When I was a teacher in South Africa, and I taught students from across the continent, they were constantly shocked that they had a math teacher that identified as a woman. Like, I was the first woman, and this was A-level math, that I had ever taught them at this level before, and they thought that was an anomaly. So I think that yes, we may not have depend on your country, may not have the racial aspect of things, but it's still this notion that this subject still it's has decided who belongs in this space, and it's not a subject that somehow everyone doesn't belong in it, and that shows up in different ways depending on the context where you are, which is a problem. I always say that math needs we definitely need a new publicist, because we are really not doing a good job at all. And then that translates to that other question of teachers. I didn't include this in the talk, but there was a scholar, Lisa Darragh, in New Zealand, who did a study analyzing how the subject mathematics, math teachers and math learners are positioned in young adult novels. And it was a massive corpus of novels that she selected, I think, using libraries from different countries in the world that have picked the top books that young adult kids like, all of that. It was a lot. And across these books, most of them had nothing to do with math, like that was in the context in any way. But when math was discussed, the characters were in a math class or something like that, the teachers were all almost always depicted as evil. This was the class you avoided. This was the class you hated. They were almost always, there were hardly ever Black characters that were the math learners or those who enjoyed math in these books. But I think about the teacher part, and I agree. I have had horrible math teachers. I think at the university level, it's not great. At the secondary level, I think it's a mix. Unfortunately, we have those who have chosen to go with the colonial aspect of so when I'm saying the coloniality, the notion that this we have to protect math. Math doesn't belong to everybody type of belief. And so we do have those teachers who feel like, oh, you failed that test, great, you don't belong here, versus maybe I can support you in trying to belong here. So I think that is a problem, and that it's not a lie that math teachers have not always taught math in a way where they themselves believe that everyone deserves to be, and everyone is capable of being taught in ways that would support them. And I try to change this every day as I teach future math teachers, future secondary math teachers, which is what I do here at York. And so, yeah, so I feel like I think with your question on how Canadian, given how the immigration patterns in Canada and how the face of Blackness will also keep changing, I find that I didn't get to delve too deep in this for this study, and I actually do want to talk to parents, because one thing I'm not sure about is that as these youth were really talking about their experiences in these spaces, I'm not sure, well, all of the youth I spoke to, I believe, are the Nigerians are first generation Canadian. And so I don't know if they can if their parents would even understand if they're sharing what they're going through in these classes, or if it's just like, hey, we're here, face your front and do your work, versus really like, okay, we should talk to the school, like what's happening, like what can we do? That part, I think that I'm really curious to see how that if those conversations are happening in these spaces. And in fact, one of the youth who is Caribbean, she did say that her parents, their own notion was that, I mean, you know, we should be grateful, like we're here, it's a better place to be. And so that was the conversation of, you will deal and it's fine. Which I think is really different. You brought up the US case, where it's not surprising that there are a number of scholars in the US whose research is about ensuring that mathematics is more humanizing for Black learners and other racialized people compared to here, where that just hasn't been the case. So, okay, I know I talked all over the place, but I do feel like I'll end with sharing that I think this research isn't meant to, I'm not, this particular study is focused particularly in racialized context, because I don't believe that that part translates. The part that does translate is that math is always, and I think most societies, positioned as a subject for an exceptional few. I think that part does translate everywhere.
Great, thank you. So I think I had seen Eunice before. So we'll go with Eunice and then we'll finish with Mohammed. And I think that'll finish off the questions for today. Yeah.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you, Osibodu, for a great presentation. If there's anything that has happened for me today, is the learning that has emanated from your presentation. And it is so timely because I am a mother of a Black boy who's in grade 10. And the most coincidental thing that has happened is that today I was dealing with a situation in school that has to do with a math teacher. And the math teacher's attitude towards my son's grades. I have two categories of children. I do have a 13-year-old girl who is a math girl, and I have a 15-year-old boy who he loves math, but he's struggling with math, but he is determined. And you asked a very critical question that really caught my attention. We do have this demographic of Black kids who are already excelling in mathematics, like you shared in your story. But they're struggling in gaining acceptance or even excelling in math because of systemic issues that are going on that are beyond them. But then when you ask the question of what happens to those people who are struggling, but they are motivated, where is their support system? Really, that struck me. And the reason why it struck me is because I am an accountant by profession. That's my background before I came to Canada. And I remember struggling with mathematics myself in grade 8. And I remember getting 36%. We were the three of us in the class, and we are the only ones who got 36%. And it was quite a wake-up call. But I remember what made my final grade to be 76%, a shift from 36 to 76% towards the end of the term. It was the support system that was around me. It was the teacher who looks like me, who can connect with my challenges, and who saw like I am determined. And in my observation that pertains to my observation with my son right here, I can see the motivation. I can see myself in him. I can see the motivation. I can see his desire to excel in math. But what I have seen is lack of that relatable connection. Someone who is invested in the interest of this Black child. And very interestingly, because I did have a conversation today with the vice principal of the school to kind of ask, I understand the school board provides infrastructure because I don't think it's only my son who's struggling with mathematics. And I was trying to bring a perspective that it's one thing for my son to say he's struggling. It's another thing if he was hiding his grade. What would you be coming to me, telling to me? You would be telling me that have your son notified you that he's struggling, but my son is not hiding his grade. So what is lacking here is support system. And in my observation, what is lacking within, especially the Canadian school system, where our kids are struggling, and when I say our kids, I'm talking about the Black kids in their many dimensions. I'm saying that they don't see themselves. They don't even feel like they can approach a particular teacher and have a conversation of like, I am struggling. And even if they go, they don't feel appreciated. They don't feel like they can get that support. And why am I saying this? Because some few weeks ago, we had a parents teachers meeting, and I know the attitude of the teacher that I'm dealing with. I know already he was already looking down on me as a Black African parent. So when you look at the multidimensionality of some of these entanglements that the Black children are going through when you're dealing with the complexity that goes around math and the what I would call the ideological traumas around math, I can say there's that gap of lack of representation. And if my child does not see themselves, and then the school system itself does not provide the infrastructure to kind of bring this math person that is so determined out, like how I was brought out when I got 36%. The teacher saw the determination and was like, Eunice, I'm going to work with you and I'm going to help you. And I ended up getting with a 76% at the end. And as you noted, Osibodu, you say that nobody has to love math. But then again, you mentioned it's a required course. So when you look at the multidimensionality of the complexities around the placement of math as a required subject, and then again, the racialization of smartness when it comes to math, you see so many complexities in there that are geared towards the removal of the Black face towards math. And that does not solve the problem because I would say it's more of constructed failure, a constructed positioning of trying to prove a point. Because even at this point, I'm struggling with unpacking why would math be, let's even assume, because not everybody has to love math, why would it be placed as a required subject? Yet when my son is seeking support, he's struggling to get that support, yet he's expressing he wants support, he needs support. So if it were the other way around, that he's not coming to school, he's a bad kid in school, the narrative would be broad. Your son does not come to school, he does not work, he does not commit. But when I'm doing my assignments, because I am a student at York University, I'm sitting next to my son, doing his assignment and trying his really best to do what he needs to do. So that dynamic is really complex. And I keep on asking myself over and over again, how do we assist those who are struggling with math and they are willing, they are determined to cross over? Because that's the positionality of my son. I'm not so sure if you would have answers to that, but probably based on your experience and your study, you may be able to shed more light to that. And probably a point of something to think about some of these complexities that our children are facing in school, because mine is a real-time situation. It was today that I was having that conversation. So, and I believe that my son's case is not a unique case. And then I keep on asking myself, what about those students, Black students, who are struggling, but their parents, because of multidimensional complexities, they don't have the agency to go and ask those critical questions in school. Where are they? Who talks on their behalf? And how can that gap be sealed? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Eunice, for those super, I mean, I love that this was real, like, this is happening currently. And and you know, when I say that I don't think you have to love math, it didn't imply that you, because I still believe that you don't have to love all the subjects, but you should be supported to succeed in the subjects. Like, you don't have to be passionate, is my point. Like, because I think if we're assuming that our goal is that we need to make sure all Black learners are passionate in math, why? Let them be passionate with whatever they want to be passionate about. But they should not be passionate about math because we have closed the door and said that you don't, you know, this isn't even, it's not even within the realm of possibility that this could be a space for you. That's the issue that I have. And I think this is, you know, it is connected, because I feel like in the same, I think my question when you asked the Eunice is that if another student who isn't Black, for instance, says that they are struggling, we've all struggled in whatever different subject, it's normal. Are they getting help, or is the struggle in math? This is drawing for some research that Carl James has done, how quick it is when a Black student is struggling to push them out and say they just don't belong in this class, versus it's normal for you to struggle. Let us support you to do better because you want to be here, instead of pushing you out into a different stream. And so I think that is, this is part of what I'm trying to do in this work, and really showing that there are issues in math that goes beyond the streaming. And in fact, I know that there are those who are opposed to this streaming because they are like, and you can tell the racial undertones where it's like, well, but everybody can't do this. And who are the everybody that you're thinking can't do this? In that type of talk. So I do think that's, I don't have the solution at this point, but I'm grateful that you are able to advocate for your child, and I hope that the teacher does support and that there's tutors. And I know that in my work, some of the youth, they talk about that, tutoring is really important, but they might prefer to be tutored in a space like the Black Student Union or something like that, where they're being tutored by others who look like them. And so I wonder if that is a possibility, if that's something that you might be able to request. I think peer tutoring is such a powerful tool, and one that I really appreciate. And I can also share that if you want to tutor, I am happy to reach out to, I will put my email in the chat, and I always get emails like this. My students are always looking to tutor others, and so always happy to connect you to potential tutors as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so we are at time. So I'm gonna ask you all to send a big thank you to Dr. Molade Osibodu for her wonderful talk. We all learned a lot today. Thank you all for your discussion. Yes, we welcome you to come and join us at our other Tubman Talks. We have another one happening next week as well. But it's going to be a tough one to beat. All right. Thank you again, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you.